That's what I appreciated about Beauvoir and Sartre. Like, and that's what Beauvoir opened up for me, like a way to, think that it's okay to challenge expectations or at least question them. And if you go back to the expectation, that's fine. At least you've thought it through. Her concept of authentic love was really something that captured me. This idea, as you say, of authentic love being the mutual recognition of two freedoms. I could choose to stop loving. Like if I can choose to stop loving, why can't I choose to start loving? So that was one of the questions that was consuming me. I was reminded of Friedrich Nietzsche, who was like, one of the important things is to say yes to life, to leap in and to affirm life, to affirm that we're here, that to affirm our choices in a strong way. And that kind of clicked for me in marriage. And I'm like, I want to say yes to you as my partner in life. I want to, try this path, see where it goes. And yeah, let's leap in. Let's do it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Love and Philosophy. Today I'm speaking with Skye Cleary. She's a philosopher at Columbia University. And I want to say thanks to Scott Barry Kaufman of the Psychology Podcast, which you should definitely listen to if you haven't already, because he put Skye and I in touch, and I'm so glad he did. It's a wonderful conversation, and I learned so much from her books. The ones I read and that we discuss here or that frame this conversation are Existentialism and Romantic Love. And then the second is How to Be Authentic, which is about Simone de Beauvoir and the quest for fulfillment. This is a bold, beautiful expression of a lot of philosophical ideas in everyday, real life language. Skye is not afraid to talk about her own personal life in a certain sense. As I discuss here, I had certain expectations of what maybe her life was like, and the more I started reading the books, the more I realized I had really wrong expectations. And we talk about that, about how she did a lot of things that maybe people didn't expect from her, like becoming a lieutenant in the army, for example, learning Taekwondo, not only learning it, but excelling at it. All these kinds of things that defy expectations, so to speak, but then make you realize that why did you have those expectations in the first place? Where did those come from? Which I find a fascinating turn of thought, and one we certainly need more of. So check out her books if you haven't already, and I hope you enjoy this conversation and that some of the places we go here feel familiar to you or open up something for you and resonate in a way that will add something to your day. Thank you for being here. Hello, Skye. Good morning to New York. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Andrea. Thanks so much for having me.
I've been walking around listening to you on audiobooks and reading your stuff lately, and there's so much I would love to get into, but we've got about an hour. So I do want to start with your personal story. I wonder, when you were growing up, did you feel a lot of expectation coming from the people around you, but also, maybe putting it on yourself? That word, expectation. I just want to start with that word and what comes to mind early in your life.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely did grow up with a lot of expectations on me. And I mean, I think we all do. And Simone de Beauvoir, I'll jump right in, calls this sedimentation. So, as we grow up, there are things that we collect, and, which include, one of the big ones is expectations that, shape. They don't necessarily determine completely who we are, but they definitely shape who we become in sometimes very strong ways. So yeah, I did grow up with expectations, and with respect to, say, love, where I just assumed that I would fall in love, get married, have babies, live happily ever after. That was sort of my internalized expectation.
Why was that your expectation? Was it coming from just culture? You grew up in Australia, right?
Yeah, and I think Australian culture is fairly similar to American culture in many ways. And yeah, we have these influences of, yeah, pop culture, or movies, romantic comedies.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess I watched a lot of them, but also from family expectations. It was just, it's what my parents did. It's what everyone was doing. It's what we were all expected to do. And that was just sort of the life trajectory. Oh, that was the formula for a happy life that was laid out for me.
Yeah,
Uh,
I understand that. I guess what I'm trying to get at is how aware you were of it and when you became aware of it. Because we all do grow up with expectations and they're different, but sometimes our parents or our caretakers say, hey, this is what we want from you, or they give you little nudges. In the case of my family, quite young, they were already sort of giving me these little code words of marriage or when you have kids and all of this. So you just kind of assume that's the path you have to take. But at some of us, and quite often a lot of the philosophers that you talk about and write about, and you yourself in different ways, we push against those or we start to question them and we start to develop a different kind of agency about them. So what I'm trying to understand is when you started to think about that.
Yeah, I guess for a long time I was like just sort of accepted them and didn't really question them. But it wasn't until like I was in my 20s, I think, that I really looked around and I sort of thought, okay, well, look at all these people getting divorced. Look at all these people in unhappy marriages. And so I started having a lot of questions about whether that fall in love, get married, have babies, live happily ever after was the formula for a good life and a fulfilling life, and whether that was the point. Because I saw that, so many relationships, they weren't happy. There wasn't the one, because, there were lots of other people who they would date after, who I would date afterwards. I'm like, how do I know this boyfriend is the one? Like, what's the criteria? How do we judge that? And so, yeah, it was really, I guess, certainly once I started dating, there was some questioning, but it wasn't until kind of, I got to my mid-20s when there was pressure from people around me, like, oh, when you're going to get married, what do you think about grandkids? You better not leave it too long. Like,
I know
oh,
those words.
people saying, oh, 28's the best age to get married
Oh
or have.
yeah, yeah, yeah. In your 20s, definitely before you're 30. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, okay. Nobody means harm really with it either. And a lot of it's their own expectations that were given to them. And then you just kind of pass this stuff along. But some of us end up questioning it and shifting it a bit. And that's an interesting point. And of course, we're going to talk about authenticity and Simone de Beauvoir, and you write about existentialism and this. That's all tied up with these wonderful questionings of that kind of stuff. But as you were talking, I was thinking about how my own parents didn't have this kind of relationship, and you see the pain and the heartache and the breakup. I don't know if maybe your parents are still together, but I saw that, and a lot of us do see that. And then you can't help but question it in a way. When you're looking around and seeing all this on a personal level, did you start to think about it in terms of like, was it hurting you? Was it uncomfortable? Or was it more like you had a kind of a step back? I know at some point we'll get into your own relationships, romantic relationships, but I wonder if you remember that thought process at all, like how it felt, if it felt intimate or if it felt away from you, like you were already a philosopher in a way.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I was a philosopher, but I was questioning. I
Yeah.
think what it really came to a crux when I had one boyfriend who was very controlling and had very strong ideas about how our relationship should be and what I should be doing. And, for example, sort of not doing a PhD and
Mm.
taking a step back in my career to make space for marriage and babies and things like this. And it was really sort of, that was kind of a really difficult relationship for me. And I found that these sort of the weight of these expectations on me at that time were extremely demanding, but I felt this internal resistance towards it. I'm like, I know this is wrong and I know this is not right for me, but how do I explain it? How do I put it into a language that is meaningful? How do I put it into language that's meaningful in the context of this society?
Mhm.
And that was sort of a real tension that I really struggled with for quite a while. And then
Yeah.
sort of at that time was when I started discovering the existential philosophers. It's like,
Well, this is to get to my expectations of you, right? So, of course, I didn't even know I had expectations, but just having seen things associated with you Columbia University and this and that. And I had this idea of this path of being a philosopher, and I'd kind of put it on you. And then I started actually reading How to Be Authentic. And you start talking about you were doing stock trading and you were doing a business degree and all of this. So I was like, whoa, what? Okay, this is unusual because that's not the typical philosophical route. Not that there is one, again, but I would love to hear about, like, how did this all happen? And I think this also coincides with your finding the existentialists, as you said, and especially Beauvoir.
Yeah, I guess, and I'll preface this by saying, one of the things I discovered early on, like at university, when I did join the sort of the Australian Army Reserves, is that I kind of enjoyed disrupting expectations of me because I'm, fairly, on the petite side, and nobody, and I had trouble like with the machinery and stuff, and I didn't look like the sort of person you would that would be in the Army Reserves. And I got a black belt in Taekwondo. I didn't look like that sort of person either. And so I kind of I don't know, maybe got some kind of pleasure out of, not being what people expected.
I'm really glad you brought that up because I wondered if you were kind of rebellious early on, or if you just liked discovering the other side of things. Or, I talk a lot about beyond dichotomy, and I started to notice this in your book. There's something about doing what might not be expected or exploring the other side. Or I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but
Yeah,
edge
it does.
work, or yeah.
I wouldn't say I was rebellious in any classic sense. In fact, in some ways, I was kind of conforming. But I think in many ways, like, I like what you said about exploring the other side. And I think I did enjoy that exploring, little in these kind of ways, like who I could be, or trying on different personalities. I was going to say that, but that's a bit of a cliche, just trying different things with my life to see where I could take them. So I think that what you said there is a really nice way of summing that up. That resonated.
It also resonates, I think, with Beauvoir and transcendence, and the way I feel like you show it too in the way you write about her and in your own work, but she's opening up the space between those either ors through, I think, what you call like projects too sometimes, so that you don't self-sabotage yourself. And there's this also the way that you talk about transcendence as being almost like a perspectival shift or something. There's some kind of practice in there that feels really important to me, and I think is important in our lives. When I look at your life, it looks like those are, I mean, everyone's life would look that way, but there are really important moments there when you can look at things from a different perspective, right? And that's connected with agency.
Yeah, and that's I really appreciate that you brought up the transcendence, overcoming or stretching yourself beyond the facts of your existence, beyond your, the path that you meant to go down. And, even though I think, stretching myself in these ways of, Army Reserve and Taekwondo and things like that. I was doing Taekwondo because my brother did it first, and I was doing the Army Reserve because I think my uncle did it or something. So I was still in some ways treading that path of not what was expected, but what was familiar and open to me. And I appreciate that about my parents, that they sort of pointed out these possible paths. And as you say, that was a very kind of, I guess, a Beauvoirian thing in many ways. And she, being a woman writing philosophy in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, was always challenging that kind of narrative of what a woman is expected to do, which is more, tends to be more, keep quiet, stay to themselves, not disrupt too many things. But of course, at that time, I didn't really know who Simone de Beauvoir was. I didn't discover her until
we have to
later.
get to that. There's two things we kind of opened up that we haven't unpacked yet. You talked about joining I would say the Army. You became a lieutenant, which is another like surprise when I'm reading your book. Yeah, so I hadn't said that yet. You mentioned it, but that was another one of those moments of awakening. But I guess like all of that, but let's go back to when you were going to do an MBA, I think. You'd been working in, I think, finance and stocks or something, and then to do your MBA. And then this is kind of where you discovered, I guess, existentialism in the way that it took hold of you, or.
Yeah, it was before that I worked on a trading desk. I was one of the very few females there. But yeah, and that was in New York. Work visa ran out, moved back home. Um, and yeah, still did finance from back home, and then, but just I don't know, I got sick of being like I felt a bit like a vampire because I was trading, international markets and up all night, and I'm like, I
Can't
need
imagine. Wow.
you need to do something different. I'm like, how about an MBA?
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, and what I didn't expect out of that was my MBA at Macquarie University in Sydney. There were philosophers on faculty there, and so I was, in my first semester, kind of one of the professors started talking about, I guess her PhD was on freedom and responsibility in the boardroom, like the existential
Oh.
boardroom, something like that. And so she was talking about some of these ideas of Sartre and Beauvoir.
Mhm.
And I was like, wait, who are these people? Like, tell me more. And it was just one lecture. And at the end of the lecture, I went up to her and said, okay, what is it? Tell me more about this Simone de Beauvoir person. And funnily enough, I'd studied some philosophy in my undergraduate degree, but it was very sort of analytical and all about logic and all that sort of thing, which was fine, but it didn't really grab me enough to continue it. But I'm just like,
Mhm.
wow, if they taught me about this in my undergraduate degree, maybe I would have had a different path. But it was, I don't know, there was something about this language of, as you said, facticity and transcendence and freedom and responsibility and authenticity. And I'm like, this is super interesting. I want to know more. And at the end of that lecture, after I'd asked the professor, she's like, oh yeah, I'll bring you some recommendations. And sure enough, beginning of the next class, she hands me a list. And
Oh, cool.
Beauvoir's The
Wonderful
Mandarins
teacher.
was
I
it?
love teachers when they
Yeah,
follow
yeah.
through on that.
Professor Anne-Marie Moody. Yeah,
All
she
right,
was
good. Good shout out.
inspirational. And yeah,
Thank.
and so I started reading the Mandarins, and I was kind of hooked from
Oh,
then
that was the
on.
first one. Wow. Yeah.
Yep, it was.
Yeah, there's so much in there. And so I think it's so rich with all the existential themes, of course, like authenticity, freedom, and so on. But also, I imagine this is a time when you were also dealing with the relationship, maybe the one that was difficult.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I
Okay.
mean, and it wasn't
Yeah.
just that one that was difficult. There were
Well,
others,
yeah.
sort of, other relationships at the time where I was sort of questioning what I wanted out of a relationship, or how I thought a relationship should be.
So I can imagine, and I know this from reading and listening to your audiobooks and reading your books, and that that also kind of touched something that you can unwind this in the right way. But I kind of imagine it was like you were looking for a way to rethink those stories of love, probably maybe not consciously, but and I see, Simone de Beauvoir and Sartre and their relationship as like, whoa, if you haven't heard of it before and then you hear of it, it's like, whoa, okay, this is a different way, another path. Was it like that for you, or?
It definitely was. So yeah, you've definitely assumed correctly. And about that time, there was a book that came out called Tete a Tete by Hazel Rowley, which was specifically about Beauvoir and Sartre's relationship, and which was that they just briefly they I guess they met at the Sorbonne when they were in college, and they agreed to an open relationship, or they agreed to like an exclusive relationship for a couple of years, but then, didn't want to deny each other the freedom of falling in love with other people. And it wasn't just about sex, because they thought if we're just giving people freedom to have sex, that's kind of a cheap and kind of very superficial understanding of freedom. But so
Yeah.
and that was really shocking to me because I was very much brought up with, the narrative of monogamy and marriage. And yeah, because Beauvoir and Sartre never married. And so this was a real surprise to me and eye-opening in many ways. I mean, I didn't think that I wanted an open relationship, like that
No.
didn't
Yeah.
resonate with me. But what I loved, what I appreciated was the fact that they were both challenging the expectations of how their relationship should be. And of course, this was in like the 1930s, 1940s, which was
Incredible.
it's
Yeah.
still fairly radical now, but back then
Yeah.
it's more acceptable now and in society, but it's still not the dominant thing. So I I did love how they were pushing back on expectations and creating a relationship like on their own terms, and creating what worked for them, what was right for them. And they were also really thoughtful and intentional about how they were going to be with each other. And they said, yeah, let's be transparent with one another. And this is, and how they sort of formulated the kind of dynamics of their relationship. And I'm like, that's really refreshing. Even if I want a monogamous relationship, like I loved that they were creating it what was authentically meaningful for them at the time. And that's one of the things I found really inspirational.
Yeah, and it also just opens, it's like when I encounter things like that, it's then you realize, oh, there are other paths that other people are doing. And just the very realization of that opens up a space of agency, because it doesn't mean you want to follow that exact path, but then all these other spaces open up between the path you thought was the only path and that one. And it's like, oh, we could explore all of these kind of things. So, and you brought up freedom and responsibility. I want to look at that a little bit. But so did this help you? I mean, so at this moment, I think of it as like a kind of fulcrum, right, in your life, because you're studying business and then here comes Beauvoir. And I don't know, it sort of, I guess that's what sets you towards philosophy and probably also the PhD, which one of your partners didn't want you to do and all this. So it's a moment of transition in a lot of ways in terms of your relations with your work, your lovers, your whatever. I don't know, but maybe you can help me see if that is that correct.
Yeah, it is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it was, yeah, it's whole, and it was really these concepts, this language, this understanding. I mean, they didn't have all the answers. I know they didn't have all the answers,
No,
but
no, no.
at least gave me a kind of a framework and a language to start thinking about, um, like um, helping me understand that my questions were like healthy questions, and it was
Mm,
okay to be asking these, and here
mm.
and
Gosh,
here.
that's a good way to put it. That can be so beneficial just to have that.
Yeah, exactly. And questioning that sort of romantic arc of what's expected of us. And yeah, definitely set me on kind of a different trajectory and helped me clarify my own values of what I wanted. Like I wanted someone who was supportive and accepting of me and my ambitions in life, for example, to do a PhD, and not someone who was going to view it as an obstacle to them and their kind of goals for the relationship. And or at least someone who was happy to talk about it and discuss and think
Mm,
about what was in an equal sense, you know.
yeah.
So recognizing that both my projects and my partner's projects were equally valid, and uh, was open to a conversation about how we would create a life together that incorporated these things that we were both independently passionate about. And because I think relationships are compromises in many ways. Like, you live with someone, you've got to put up with their wet towels on the floor and things
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that. And I mean, I'm being facetious, but just these superficial things are compromising. But and then there may be paths that you adjust for the other people. Like, for example, I'm Australian, and so my husband wanted to move to New York, back to New York for his work. And I'm like, okay, well, how could I still fulfill, what I'm passionate about in New York? And it turns
Mm.
out it was even more kind of, there were more doors and possibilities for me here. So that actually kind of really worked well for us. And but we talked through that. So yeah, okay. So I jumped I jumped a
No,
bit.
that's actually very illustrative of that same thing of what we were talking about is if you're, I like that you just brought in the openness. It's not just that there's a right kind of relationship or a wrong, but some of it is opening that space and being open to it. Like if you hadn't been open to it with your husband, for example, you wouldn't have known that all those other paths existed that might actually be what you want. So yeah, there's something that relates, I think, a little bit to freedom. But how did you get out of that relationship and get into philosophy? It seems hard for me to understand you're studying business and then, I mean, you do have quite the endurance. We've seen that in a lot of ways, in what you've done, but how did you do that?
I mean, getting out of relationships is often not easy, but I think it was clear for both of us that it wasn't working. And so it was, a matter of setting boundaries, saying,
Hmm.
no, I don't want this as part of my life. I don't. This is what I want. It's not what you want. And clearly you want something, and what you want is totally valid, but I can't be supportive. I can't be who I want to be with you. Or I feel that's being with you would be a closing down of myself in some ways, my possibilities.
So you brought the philosophy into it. Is that how you started talking it
yeah,
through? Yeah.
yeah.
And
I,
did you
I
quit your master's and start philosophy at the same time too? I mean,
no, I finished my
oh
MBA.
wow, so you also have the MBA. Okay.
Yeah, so that was sorry, yeah, that was my master's, was my MBA. And so that's how I kind of was introduced to philosophy. And then, but it wasn't like, oh, quick switch to
No,
philosophy.
no, no.
This takes time. And so I finished my MBA, and I was a management consultant for a couple of years, but during that time I also was kind of doing philosophy as the side hustle, I guess.
Wow. Philosophy as a side hustle. Awesome.
Um,
What does that
yeah.
look like? How did you do that?
Well,
Writing?
I mean, I was studying it on the
Yeah,
side
yeah.
part time, and I was doing a research project. And then after that, I sort of applied for the PhD, and I was still working management consulting, I started the PhD part time, but then, after I think a year or so, I was awarded a scholarship for the PhD, so I quit management consulting and shifted to that full time. And yeah, and during that time, yeah, I was sort of building the relationship with the person who is now my husband.
Okay.
And
So we'd gotten out of I mean, I'm speaking but you had gotten out of the relationship that was constrictive and somehow philosophically found a way out of that one. And you'd met the man that's now your husband with you in New York. Husband, right?
yeah, so he's Australian too. I met him in Australia,
Okay.
and
Okay.
together.
So did you feel a sense of freedom and agency different in that now that you were doing your PhD? Because it sounded like you had at least you could do it with some money and funding, and you're reading, I guess, Beauvoir and the Existentialists because your PhD project became Existentialism and Romantic. I mean, it turned into a book called Existentialism and Romantic Love. So I'm assuming you were really diving into all this. It sounds to me like a really beautiful, exciting time. Was it? Or
Yeah, it was,
yeah.
yeah, beautiful, exciting, frustrating as well.
Frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I actually never even considered doing a PhD until one of my MBA professors, Professor Spillane, said, "Oh, you should do a PhD." And I'm like, "Wait, what?" That never even factored into my life up until
Wow,
that.
you had some good teachers who kind of pointed you in good
Mm,
ways or important ways.
yeah, because I had these questions, and I remember one of the first questions I was obsessed with, which was related to these men in my life, was, can you choose to love, or to what extent is love a choice? And I was
Mm,
like,
mm,
it sort of feels like maybe you can't choose to love, but
mm,
in but I was feeling, in the sort of breakup, I felt like I could choose to stop loving.
mhm.
Like, if I can choose to stop loving, why can't I choose to start loving? So that was one of the questions that was consuming me. And I guess,
Beautiful, very philosophical. Yeah.
yeah. Um, so yeah, that was sort of, yeah, one of the key underlying questions. And of course, the existentialists were very much all about choice, and how we can control our life. Where there are certainly those facts, the facticity of our existence, but where are the windows for transcendence? Where are the windows where we can choose? So we can't choose our genes. We can't choose to be thrown into the world. We can't choose to be here. We can't choose, the type of, features we're born with. We can't choose the structure of society or the place we're born into. But where are those windows that we can seize our freedom and kind of, forge our own paths in, authentically meaningful ways? And so with love, it's like, maybe we can't choose, who we're attracted to. Maybe we can't control those pheromones, or whatever the chemicals, or who knows. But where is that window of freedom? And the freedom is in our behavior. It's how we respond to those feelings, because
Mm,
um, we're higher order animals, and we seem to be able to override our animal impulses, and
mm,
choose whether to engage with people or walk away from people. And so, that behavior is sort of a loving behavior. We can choose to be loving towards someone, to be kind, to be supportive, accommodating, to be affectionate. So that's the behavior, that's the part that we can choose, and we can stop not, we can choose not to do that with people who we need to have out of our lives.
Yeah, that's a choice. I mean, I hadn't thought about the word choice. It's although it's infused in all of this, and of course in all the writing, but that's directly related to agency, isn't it? And freedom and power. So I guess that's what I'm trying to get at, and not expressing very well. But as I was reading and listening and to your work, there's this way in which so agency matters a lot, and but agency is related to choice. But a lot of this has to do with what I was trying to bring up with the expectation and stuff. So we kind of come in with this path that's been tread for us in a way. And of course we're going to create a new one, but we have our parents and we have media and all this telling us kind of which paths are the right paths. And then there's that moment where you do develop some way of questioning that and reflection. And that's where the agency starts, at least I think for me. And it also gets into all these existentialist ideas of what all of this means. And I guess it is really about that choice. So do you feel like there's something about the reflective process that is crucial for opening up that space of agency and choice? And yeah, that seems very connected to freedom too. I know that's messy, but I'm trying to figure it out. I don't know what that raises for you.
Yeah, I think what you just said resonates a lot. Taking time out to philosophize and to actually have the space to ask these questions and to think about them, because our lives are also busy. We end up on autopilot. We end up just going through getting up, going to work, eating, going to exercise, sleep. It's so easy to get into these sort of habitual patterns of existence and just go on these paths. But it's a little bit like, not a little bit, like a lot like, I think the Camus' myth of Sisyphus, where we're constantly pushing that rock up the hill. We're condemned to push the rock up the hill. We're condemned to be here in this life and to do all these things for survival. But and as Camus says, that moment of reflection when when the rock rolls back down the hill and Sisyphus walks back down the hill to get the rock, it's that moment of reflection, that time out from the busyness and the drudgery of every day that's like the gold of his life. And that's why Camus says we must imagine Sisyphus happy, partly because we have that, or he has that space of reflection. But yeah, we do sort of tend to go with the flow, or another term actually Beauvoir uses in one of her novels is like we tend to get on, it's almost like we're on railroad tracks. There are these tracks that are channeling us, jobs, relationships, kids, that sort of thing. And, we're sort of set on this path and all these different paths, and to deviate from these paths to choose something quite different, whether it's a new career or something, that can be really hard to shift those tracks. But getting off those tracks, getting off autopilot, and making that space to, first of all, as you say, think about what we really want, to question, to and I was going to say introspect, but it's not just questioning ourselves. It's actually, communicating with others can give us sort of these really deep insights into our being that we don't always see ourselves. Like, for example, with me and my husband, with him moving back to New York, wanting to come back to New York, I was like, oh, that never even popped up on my realm of possibilities. But okay, let's think about that. What would I do then? And so this whole new sort of world kind of opened up for me in a good way. And so I'm like, sure, let's do it. Let's leap in. Let's have this adventure and see where that goes.
It's really important because that brings up this idea of intersubjectivity that is also crucial in Beauvoir, and especially as you present it, that it's not just, yeah, this gets at something else I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, because with existentialism in Nietzsche, for example, in existentialism and romantic love, we don't have time to go into all of it, but there's Nietzsche, there's Kierkegaard, there's Beauvoir in the end, there's 5 different people, Steiner, yeah. And you talk about different ways of thinking about love, but I would say just kind of, people often think of existentialism almost as like a solitary pursuit, like the myth of Sisyphus, but we're all alone, it's dark, and then you already kind of juxtapose love with that, which is fascinating. But also the intersubjectivity becomes really important in this, that it's not, and of course this speaks to Beauvoir and a lot of the things, but it's not actually solitary. It's never solitary. You're in conversation. And part of the authenticity or the real freedom is recognizing that. That's kind of where the agency is too. Did you think of existentialism as dark and kind of um,
Yeah, I mean,
solitary? Or yeah.
I mean, as you say, it's kind of got that reputation.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is one of the things I love about Beauvoir because she's very far from that idea of existentialism. And she kind of presents, I don't want to say optimistic existentialism, but there's definitely a lot more optimism in her work than, say, for example, in Sartre's work, Sartre is much more about, especially in Being and Nothingness, it's all about, yes, radical freedom. And Beauvoir's like, well, yeah, sure, we can, think about being free, but it's not like we really have radical freedom in any meaningful sense, because she's like, there's lots of limitations on our freedom. For example, living in society, and
Yeah.
and she's like, what, being thrown into a world where other people are there, other people are trying to create meaning. We're all in webs of relationships. That's like the
Reciprocal relation. That's what you talk about a lot. Yeah.
yeah, reciprocal relation. And so this is kind of the foundation of her ethics, which is
Mm-hmm.
another reason why I love Beauvoir,
Mm-hmm.
because she really worked on this ethics of ambiguity and thinking about, what do we owe other people, and what, I mean, the thing is that other people are there. We already live in relationship with them. And if we value freedom for ourselves, then we must value it for other people. Otherwise it's exploitative or oppressive or hypocritical, at least. So um yeah,
Yeah. She says, I
and
think you quote once that, if we can't be free till everyone is free, or something like this. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, we can't be genuinely free because our freedom depends on the freedom of other people, or our freedom becomes meaningful when other people are free, when other people have the same possibilities for us. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean we will embrace those possibilities, but when, I mean, she talks about it, we have an open sky in
Yeah.
which to, project ourselves. Um,
And that relates to that expectation, and that there's these kind of parameters being set, right? And they're not being set by you. You're not doing that alone. And so there's another way in which the freedom of others is your freedom in that sense too. In the same way we were talking about with coming into the world and having these expectations, and then you kind of wake up to it. That's all within a particular set of parameters that isn't your agency, right?
Mm. Yeah, and there's another metaphor she uses, which I think the Stoics also talk about, which is or talked about originally, which is like, society, humanity is like um a stone arch, and all of us are stones in this arch.
Oh.
And the stronger the arch, like the stronger we are as stones, the more protected we are. And, the more, these stones kind of propel off, in their own ways, the weaker the arch. And so I love that. And, another actually kind of concept of Beauvoir's, which we haven't mentioned yet, which is, I think, relevant to many of the things we're talking about, is this idea of being for ourselves versus being for others.
And being
And
with, yeah, that's a very nice way you say it too. Being with, not, yeah.
yeah, and being with is sort of the kind of what we're working towards as a harmony, but quite often we think about authenticity as being for ourselves. It's what we want. It's just, us as individuals. Whereas Beauvoir's like, well, no, because we live in society, there is a dimension of our being which is for others. And if we lean too far into being for others, like doing what everybody else wants us to do, that's not a fulfilling mode of being. And she talked about how women are so often for men or for their children, and are giving up so much of themselves to
Mm.
serve other people. And she thought that was really problematic, because you tend to be pulled so far away from yourself. But being completely for yourself isn't healthy either, because you become isolated. It's a very self-centered, kind of selfish mode of being. So we've got to find a balance between these if we want to live in society, and which most of us do.
Mm.
what we need to find is kind of a balance, or find a way to, it's always going to be a tension, because there are always going to be things people want for us and from us. And, where there will be times when we will need to pull back, to, assert ourselves and be agents of our own lives. But because we're in these webs of relationships, we need to try and figure out that, and as you say, this being with others, how to be with others in a way that sort of manages these two competing kind of polar opposites.
And I think that also speaks to the power of choice and agency, because it's not that so those roles, right? That those expectations are only negative or something if you haven't chosen them. If it's what you want and what you choose, that's completely different than just sort of being railroaded into that, or sideline. I don't know what the words is she uses, but where you're just on those paths and you feel like there are no other paths, like nobody gave you the Beauvoir book or whatever, and so you're following the route because you didn't know there's another route. The agency hasn't expanded. You haven't gotten that way, which I was trying to kind of point out of what you might have done, or what a lot of us do, where we do sort of throw ourselves into the opposite perspective, because that does open up that space, even if you don't want to take that path totally. When you learn about Beauvoir and Sartre, it opens up all the space. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the choice matters. Like, it's not that all these categories and paths are wrong, but if you haven't been able to choose it, then the authenticity, or the freedom, the responsibility, all those things are very different, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I mean, I want to say ignorance, or not being aware of what the options are, can be very limiting
Mm-hmm.
if you're not being educated, if you don't have access to the internet or Wi-Fi, if you don't have access to libraries, if you're sort of kept away from understanding possibilities of the world, that's hugely limiting. Or, I mean, even for me, like, so for example, going back to the Beauvoir and Sartre example, for me, it was like recognizing, oh, there are all these other options out there for how we could do relationships. And then it brought it back to me, okay, well, what do I want for my relationship? And fine, I
Yeah.
ended up going a fairly traditional path in the end, but I
Yeah.
thought a lot about it. And,
Yeah. And
I
you
don't
tried the
know.
other side for a while too. I mean, I was thinking about that. Like, again, I'm probably projecting a little bit, but you did take that route for a while, more than others were probably giving you pressure to do, to take the space and not get married and not follow the route and think about it, and so on. So you know what that's like too. You know what it's like to be on that side where everyone's looking at you that way. So that's interesting too. And then I could imagine, oh, well, why wouldn't I also want to try this other path if it makes sense with this partner that I'm with now? So I guess I'm trying to open that up too. It's not that the choice, because we often think, oh, you either get married and have kids and that's one route, or you don't, and you're kind of selling out. I hate that term, but it's important. If you've going to go one way and then you go the other, but this is not a helpful way to think of it either, is it?
Yeah, that's true. And I respect people for getting married. I respect people who don't decide to get married, but at the time it was. And we also need to acknowledge the structure of society that we're in, which
Mm-hmm.
the reality is there are lots of incentives for people to get married. It's
True.
not just acceptance, it's like taxes. It's like, oh, moving to New York would have been so much harder if we weren't married, like moving here together.
True.
But on a sort of, I guess, a more philosophical and less practical level, for me, it was let's have a baby.
Yeah,
And
wow. That's
so,
beautiful. I love that saying yes. But
yeah.
yeah, that's a different phenomenology or lived experience or sensuality of being in that position where you want to say yes versus, because I've been in both, versus feeling like you really should say yes because like you're getting older and everybody says you should do this and the person is there and it looks good on paper or whatever.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the other things that was meaningful to us when we were sort of making this decision is that the recognition that just because we have a marriage certificate doesn't solve all the problems. It doesn't put things in cement.
Mm,
And so one of the things we joke about is we say, oh, how's marriage going for you? Oh, so far so good. Like it's just
that's
so
great.
it's like, and we joke about it, but it's also this contingency of knowing that the other might not always be there, and making sure that we're not taking each other for granted, and making sure that we're sort of continuing to choose to be in this relationship and continuing to choose to say yes to one another
Yeah, and
to
that kind of joking or doing that with each other is a little bit of a way of throwing yourself out of it and looking at it, which I think is important. Instead of just because in these relationships, especially with kids, you can just get it's so much, and you just have to have these habits and you have to have these routines. But you also still probably it's good for us to have that thrown being perspectival shift, however we can do it together. And this gets to what I love about, well, okay, so your book Existentialism, it's still hard for me to say, and Romantic Love, you explore a lot of 5 different kind of ways of thinking about romantic love, and they're all very interesting. And if we had time, I'd go into all of them. But I feel like maybe, and this is because you then write a book about Beauvoir, that Beauvoir was the idea of love that maybe stuck with you the most. All of them you get something out of, but um, there's this idea of mutual recognition, right? Of other person's freedom. I thought of the Rilke quote of protecting the other person's solitude. I mean, I think this resonates with all we're talking about here, and maybe what you're showing us that you have with your husband a bit of. There's a kind of mutual freedom. There's this conversation that you were talking about. There's this discussing, which is all part of it. Is that kind of a fair definition of what Beauvoir ends up coming to in terms of love, and maybe what you resonated with in small part about it? Or
Yeah, her concept of authentic love was really something that captured me and was probably my favorite part of, that. So existentialism and romantic love kind of grew out of my PhD, and then I realized that Beauvoir was my favorite.
okay, good. Yeah. Well, you did write a book about her, so it's pretty obvious, but
Yeah.
she's my favorite too. Although I love Nietzsche, he really breaks my heart, and Kierkegaard. They both break my heart so much. Beauvoir gives me some, I don't know, uplift.
Yeah, I agree. Sartre has his moments, but
Oh
his
yeah.
anyway. So yeah, but this idea, as you say, of authentic love being the mutual recognition of two freedoms, and yeah, this sort of reciprocal recognition is what she talks about. Yeah, which is all about, yes, respecting each other as individuals, supporting each other in your individual goals. It doesn't mean going along blindly with whatever the other wants, but it means being open to it, being supportive and respectful, and having your own projects that you do. And by projects, I mean things that you project yourself towards in the world, having those sort of individual projects, but also having, I mean, common projects. Because if you don't, like, where's the relationship? What are you going to do together? But it's creating yourselves in the world together. And whether it's, I mean, Beauvoir talks about it might be building a home together or having kids together. It can be anything really you do together, but the underlying values are that it's a generous type of relationship. And I love for her discussion about generosity, where she says, the best type of relationship is where you're giving your all, but it feels like it costs you nothing, because you have this love and the other person's being generous. And so this is, yeah, I'm talking idealistically about love.
But it's a real experience too.
Yeah, and it's a real, and I think it's a beautiful goal to have, and it means coming together in your strengths, not in your weaknesses and dependencies, and um pursuing your own authentic goals, but also together. And as that resonates with that Rilke quote you said, protecting each other's solitude. It's respecting each other's need to be alone when they need to be alone, or need to do their own thing. My partner and I have our own hobbies and things we do, like sports and things, and that's okay.
Yeah, that speaks to another idea you raised about Beauvoir, which is that it lets us I want to say create new paths, but like reach beyond ourselves, or reach beyond our perspective. I would even say, the self is always a dynamic and changing, but we can reach beyond our own perspective. So if you're in a relationship like it sounds like you are, where you both are still growing and learning and doing your own stuff, then you're reaching beyond your own perspective in ways that aren't only confined to that relationship, but that brings something to the relationship. If you have this kind of relationship where you do have this dialogue, conversing, and discussing things together.
Yeah, and that can be difficult as well if the other person's, off doing their thing and there's a lot of time being spent on that, and I want to do things, or especially, I mean, kids especially bring in challenges because,
Mm.
of course, it's, more often the woman in the relationship who's left as the primary caregiver, and I talk about this in the book where
Yeah.
there was a real problem. After my son was born and my husband going off and doing his own thing and just
Sports
leaving,
and working all the time.
which just left a huge burden on me. And that
Yeah.
was a huge challenge that we had to work through. And I'm like,
But you had at least talked about it.
we did. And, this is also comes back to earlier in the discussion about expectations. I had in my mind expectations about what it meant to be a good mother and a
Mm,
good wife. And
mm,
like, yeah, I can do this. Let me handle it all. And I
mm.
just want to be the cool mom. And yeah, like this is what I'm supposed to do naturally, right? Like, and it was so hard because I was so sleep deprived for so long, and it
Oh,
just
oof.
took so much out of me. And so, and at some point I sort of brought it up to my partner. I'm like, we can't keep going like this. I can't keep doing this. Something needs to change. And so to his great credit, he sat down, he's like, okay, let's figure out what we do here. And and we were able to move forward. But I'm still a little bitter about it, to be honest, like as you can probably tell.
It's
Um,
painful, just bodily. What you I was going to bring up endurance to talk with you about because you have put yourself in a lot of situations where it requires a lot of endurance. But we all have our limits and boundaries. And part of this, what we're trying to talk about love, I think, is being able to be in a space where you can admit those and get some, I mean, that intersubjectivity, that reciprocal relation comes in to, we need it, we are it. And I can imagine it would be really hard in that situation, but I see you as someone who is very successful. Pretty much what you put your mind to, you do. I mean, you've succeeded in a lot of fields and you've got a lot of endurance. But then that situation of being a mom, it puts everyone against their absolute boundary, and you really need reciprocal relation, I guess. I don't even know what I'm really talking about, but does that resonate at all? What I'm
Yeah, it definitely does. And yeah, I mean, having a child is definitely the most challenging project of my life. But it's also, it took a lot, and it took a lot of time for me to figure out how to ask for well, first of all, to know what I needed, and then figure out how to, open up that conversation in a way that's sort of, because it felt like a failure in some ways to say, hey, this isn't working out for me so well.
But that's another thing we're taught, right? The mom is like supposed to be able to do everything, handle everything, and even if you don't believe those expectations and stories anymore, they wear on you. And
Yeah, that's just you're okay, perhaps not meeting those expectations that everyone has for you, but it's the expectations that are problematic.
no one's really meeting them. I mean, not all the
Right,
time.
exactly. Yeah, so yeah, and just to reiterate, yeah, that's what I appreciated about Beauvoir and Sartre. Like, and that's what Beauvoir opened up for me, like a way to, think that it's okay to challenge expectations or at least question them. And if you go back to the expectation, that's fine. At least you've thought it through.
Yeah, exactly. And just to kind of start to like wind it down, or I was wondering about romantic love and love, and if after all this you see those. As I was reading the work, sometimes it seemed like a lot of that stuff we talked about early on in the conversation was more romance or trying to fit into the expectations, and then the love was a little bit more of what Beauvoir gets at. She didn't live it perfectly either. No one can, but where it's not about all these things like trying to live up to the expectation. It is about the vulnerability or something like that. Do you distinguish at all between these kinds of things? Is there only one love?
Well, I definitely think there's more than one kind of love, and I quite like the ancient Greeks who had like so many different words for love, whether it's eros, philia, storge, um, and ludus and mania. I kind of think as you're speaking, I was like thinking, oh, well, there's this sort of very obsessive, kind of passionate love that's okay, one kind. And then so I think they're all kind of love, which is this attachment to another person maybe some people talk about as feelings or emotions towards another person. And this is why I'm going to come back to this authentic love again. For Beauvoir, authentic love is the mutual recognition of two freedoms. And so that's not just romantic love. Like, yes, it can be applied to romantic love, but it can be applied to a child, recognizing that a child is, growing, and they're dependent in many ways, but the role of a parent is then to nurture them into becoming a free agent of their own lives, and supporting them on their trajectory and respecting that for them. And so that I like it because it can be applied to all different kinds of relationships. But I guess, yeah, I mean, I do consider romantic love to be a kind of love. But it has its own features, like it's passionate, which would differentiate it from, say, love of, a parent. It's personal, which kind of differentiates it from more like an agape type love, which is love of humanity or love of God or that sort of thing. And includes the hope that it will last forever. And because when we go into relationships, if it's love, a loving relationship kind of embodies that hope of not just being together in the moment, which might differentiate it from, say, lust and a one night stand or a business transaction. So and it's a hope to be together in the future. I think it's sort of an existential way of putting it. So yeah, I see romance as its own kind of love. But yes, certainly many other kinds of love out there too.
Yeah, I guess I brought it up because you talk about it a bit in your book too, but sometimes with social media and notions of what romance are can be a kind of big business, and it just can feel confusing. But I like that answer. It sounds like there's a kind of nestedness or scaling to all these different ways of getting into what we think about as mutual recognition of one another, which could be with your partner, but could it also with your child, of course. But have you ever thought, could it also be with the people around you, the society, the wider ecology?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I guess with love, we were talking, yeah, the types of love I was talking about and that Beauvoir talks about is in terms of, humans. But yeah, I think it could definitely, and I know people have applied it to, the wider realm. If we respect freedom for ourselves, then we should respect it for the world around us, other species, other, forests and things like that, that sort of respect. And of course, we're not going to get respect and recognition necessarily back from some of those. I have rescue bunnies at home and they're very skittish and I love them, but the reciprocity is definitely not like out of whack there, but they're very, very sweet. So yeah, I think it can be applied in a more general way, but it wouldn't be like, say, with ecology, it's not my specialty, and I guess I'd have questions about whether that could be like how we would think about that as a relationship. Although certainly the ecology gives us oxygen or clean air and certain things like that. So yeah, we could definitely take it there, but that's not my realm.
Yeah, I guess it's just this mutual relation and this kind of reaching beyond ourselves if we started thinking of, how self is defined a little bit differently in terms of all these other challenges. I don't expect you to have to answer that. I mean, but it's interesting to think about Beauvoir and this recognition of freedom and going beyond and reciprocity or reciprocal relation in those scales too. It might be helpful, I guess.
Yeah. And one other thing that I was just thinking of is is thinking about our transcendence. And quite often we think about, if I'm doing this thing, then I have to stop someone else from doing it. And there's this sort of zero-sum game, or, think about the piece of the pie. If I get a piece of the pie, then someone else doesn't get it. Whereas Beauvoir was much more expansive about seeing the resources and things we have. And she seemed to believe, and I like this view that, yes, there's resources and we have all this thing, but ideally what we want to be able to do is transcend ourselves, let other people transcend, and we have this open sky, this world, and it's just respecting one another. And yeah, I guess it just if if I get a job opportunity and get a job, that's not a problem unless there's discrimination involved. Or if someone else gets the job, it's not like they're necessarily oppressing me.
Right. That's that either or thing we were talking about too, that, which I think from reading Beauvoir through your lens and talking about the scaling, that's why I asked about these different kinds of love. It's trying to open that up, right? If it's relational and it's reciprocal relation and it's reaching beyond ourselves and it's opening the space, there's a different approach, right? And that's closer to, I think, what she's talking about with authenticity and freedom.
Yeah, I think so. And just, it reminds me of that example, my husband pursuing his goals, coming to New York, that didn't annihilate my possibilities. It actually opened up a whole new realm of possibilities. And so I think that kind of idea is also behind how Beauvoir hoped the world would be. Although, she also didn't really consider we live in a world with a lot of limited resources where we need, where nurturing the earth is important and respecting. And we have shared oceans and things like that, shared air. That wasn't something she went into.
No, but I think the reading that you give of her kind of helps us open this, because even also, we don't have time to go into it, but there was a lot of difficulty with this relationship that we started with Sartre and Beauvoir. They were making a new path. They were trying with this conversational approach that we've been talking about, reciprocal. And to say that there was also a lot of pain involved, that it didn't go the right way, that doesn't mean that it wasn't worth opening those paths. And it doesn't mean we can't make better paths. I think that's what I'm trying to get to. And like that kind of approach of love in the way that you present it in the work, and frankly, the way I'm looking at your own life and the way that you've taken new paths, opened new paths to other people, connected paths with your writing, then for me, there's just something about that process of thinking about love as that kind of relation rather than that we have to decide between two choices. I don't know. That seems in your work, or at least that I got out of your work. So I just wanted to express it.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully expressed. Thanks, Andrea.
And it's kind of what you've done, right? By doing all these amazing things that you've done, a runner, taekwondo, stock trader, philosopher. So thank you
Thank
for opening
you.
that path, those paths.
Thank you so much.
Is there anything that we didn't touch on or that you want to say, or before we go?
No, I think that was a really lovely conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
doing it. And thanks for the books. I really enjoyed them, and I look forward to whatever is next. But thanks for coming on today and for the time and energy.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And it was so lovely to speak with you. Like you're so good at this.
Oh, thanks. Well, be well. Good luck there with your beginning of your day.
Thanks, you too. All
All
right,
right.
take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.